So this is going to be part 2 of my intuitive last layer tutorials. So this is part 3 of my intuitive last layer tutorial. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to cycle 3 corners and how to swap 2 opposite pairs of corners. And our goal at the end of this video is to line up all the corners so that the green on one corner is next to the green on the other corner, blue is next to the blue, red is next to the red, etc. So in the most trivial case, what we're going to be doing is cycling 3 corners just to match up with their edges. So this is probably about the best case you can get when you're doing intuitive last layer with commutators. So what you can see is we have this giant chunk here is solved, and then we just need to move these 2 corners here, and then this corner needs to go back there. So we need to cycle them like this. And to do this kind of cycle, all we have to do is swap these 2 corners, and then this one will be over here, and this one will be over here, and then swap the 2 corners that are here, and that'll move this one there, and that'll move these 2 over here. So in order to do 2 swaps, we can actually do this quite simply with a commutator. So I'm going to hold it so the first 2 corners we want to swap are on the front, and then the second 2 are going to be on the right there. So we're going to swap these 2 corners using F2L logic. And once we've done that, we're going to do a downturn to move the other 2 into its place, and then we're going to do the inverse of that F2L logic. It may be difficult for you at first to take the inverse of a giant string of F2L moves in your head, so I'm going to keep it simple. You may do it slightly differently in fewer moves or something like that, but this is what I find to be the easiest to keep track of. So first I'm going to push out that corner, then I'm going to bop it in there, and then I'm going to take this corner and put it back in. And I swap those 2 corners. Now I'm going to do a downturn to put the other 2 into place, and then I'm going to do the inverse of what I did before. Right. And then I'm going to do the inverse of the downturn I did during the commutator. So now I've successfully solved this cube. Now I solved the cube because all we needed to do was a cycle, and it was obvious what we needed to do. The cycle was pretty clear. Now this cube will not be solved after we do a cycle. However, it is helpful to do a cycle to this cube. And the reason is that with one cycle, we can get all the corners to be in the correct position relative to one another. We're going to be ignoring all the edges. We're just focusing on the corners. So I'm going to do a cut here and give you an example of something that we might get after doing a cycle to a cube like this. So this is one example of what we might end up with after trying to do a cycle on this cube. We may end up with something where the edges are actually opposite where they should be, but they're not solved. Let me give you another example. This is one of the most trivial examples where the edges are actually cycled, and we're going to be learning how to solve this situation in the next part. However, the only thing I'm trying to point out to you is that the corners are solved relative to one another. You can see there's a red next to a red, and even if it was like this, they're still solved relative next to one another because you have the oranges, you have the greens, you have the reds, and you have the blues next to each other. And so that's our main goal for this video, is to get all of the corners to be solved relative to one another. Now, in this case, this can be done with a cycle. And I know that because there are already 2 corners that are correct relative to one another. And here they are. So we have the reds. So ideally, what we would want to do is just swap these 2 corners. But we can't do that. We have to use a commutator, so we have to do 2 swaps. One swap and then the inverse. So what we're going to do is we're going to decide one corner that's not one of these 2 matched corners, and we're going to match it up with the correct colors. So I'm going to pick this corner, and I matched it up with the orange on the orange side and the green on the green side. And now these are not matched up, but that's okay. So now that we've decided that this is our magical corner, we're not going to change this corner, and we're just going to permute these 3 corners. So we have to figure out now the cycle that we're going to do. Well, this corner right here it has an orange and a blue on it. So if we moved it diagonally across, the orange here would line up with the orange here. So there would be 2 oranges relative to another. So this corner needs to go here. And then these corners need to move together because they're the same color and we want to keep the same colors. So these corners are going to move here to match up with the red. So the cycle is now pretty clear. We're going to go like that. And in order to go like that, we have to first swap these and then swap those. So we're going to do a swap here, then do one, and then swap those two. And the reason I know this is the corner that needs to move diagonally has to be involved in both swaps. So it's going to go here, and then it's going to be involved in the other swap. So I'm going to do the same kind of thing. I'm going to swap these two and swap these two using a commutator. So I'm doing that, doing that, doing that. Do a downturn. Do the inverse. Do an inverse downturn. And now you can see we've got the U permutation, which is just the name of when 3 corners or 3 edges need to be cycled. So that was another example of how to use a cycle to solve the corners and match them up. Now there is one more case, which I'm going to show you now, which you can also do with one commutator that's not a cycle. Okay, so now I have a situation where I have 2 corners that are swapped on opposite sides, but 2 corners that are solved on opposite sides as well. And of course 2 edges will also have to be swapped, but we're not paying attention to the edges in this video, just the corners. So how would I go about solving the corners relative to one another without having to do multiple cycles? Well, it's actually not possible with one cycle to make all the corners relative to one another properly. So what I'm going to do instead is, I'm going to turn the top face once just so we don't get confused. But the reason I'm doing this is I have these corners matched up, so you might think something about those, but if I do an upturn, they're not matched up, so you won't get confused. So now that I've done this turn, it might be a little more clear that if I swap these 2 corners, this blue will come in front here and this blue will come in front there, so the blues will actually be matched up in front. And if I swap these 2 corners, this green will go there and this green will go there. So by swapping these two pairs of corners, I can actually solve all the corners relative to one another. And I'm of course ignoring the edges like I usually am going to do when I'm just solving the corners. So I'm going to show you how to swap 2 opposite basically pairs of corners using a commutator. Now it's quite similar to the way we do a cycle. It's just that instead of doing 1 downturn, we actually will do 2 downturns. We'll do a double turn. So I'm going to go ahead and just get started doing the F2L magic. So here I'm going to knock that corner out, insert it there, insert that guy there, then do a double downturn, then bring it back up, do the inverse of what I did before, and then do another double downturn. And as you can see, I turned it into a U-perm. So that was just another example of how you can actually use commutators to solve the corners relative to one another without necessarily using a cycle. So in the next video, I'm going to be showing you how to cycle edges and how to solve various edge situations with all the corners solved.